Hello, my name's Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I am continuing with my discussion on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So what I've been doing is debunking the various conspiracy theories out there, uh, you know, which include that the mafia may have killed the JFK. I've done videos debunking that, and I'm continuing with videos debunking the conspiracy theory that the CIA killed JFK. But today I want to include, uh, I want to do a video to uh, debunk a conspiracy theory I saw was making the rounds. That is, that the Israelis or the Mossad were involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Of course, this is anti-Semitic and it's baseless, just as the others are. But importantly, this wasn't even given any notice by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which said no foreign government, there was no credible evidence that any foreign government was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In particular, it said the Soviets weren't involved. It said the Cuban government was not involved. And it said no U.S. Intelligence or law enforcement agency was involved, including, it said, the FBI was not involved, the CIA was not involved, the Secret Service was not involved. So, however, I noticed, some, a there's been this social media post by a congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. In the post, it was, by way of innuendo, insinuating that because JFK had resisted the development of a nuclear program by the Israelis, and with his assassination, the Israelis were able to develop their nuclear program. So that is some kind of fallacious form of reasoning, and of course it's a dubious way of reasoning. It's unreasonable. It's not logical. And there's some authors as well that have run with this conspiracy theory, including a Martin Sandler and a Ken McCarthy. I saw some documentaries they did discussing their books, and of course, they're going with that innuendo as well. Insinuating that, well, because John F. Kennedy had resisted, the nuclear program of the Israelis, and once he was assassinated, the Israelis were able to develop their nuclear program. So therefore, they must have been the ones who assassinated John F. Kennedy, or they were involved. Of course, that's a baseless, fallacious form of reasoning. It is, like saying, well, because an event follows one event, the subsequent event was the one that caused that prior event. That's like, okay, Y follows X, therefore Y caused X. That's a fallacious form of reasoning. Or because, it also says that, they're saying because the Israelis benefited from the unfortunate assassination of JFK, so they must have been the ones who caused the assassination of JFK. Again, that's another fallacious form of reasoning, by saying because a body benefits from a certain event, they are responsible for that event. That's like saying, well, the seed in the soil, because the seed that's been planted in the soil, and then the rainfall drops. There's rainfall that causes that seed to develop into a plant. Therefore, the seed in the soil was the one that caused the rainfall, right? This is commonplace. We know that is not the case. That seed planted in the soil is not what causes rainfall. So that's how fallacious Marjorie Taylor Greene's reasoning is, or the authors that are making these reckless innuendo, insinuating that the Mossad somehow were involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I know, there's a reason why, people think the Mossad or the Israeli intelligence agency, were involved, because there's this outsized, heroic and daring, uh, uh, characteristic that's been sensationalized in the media, in Hollywood especially, about the Mossad, especially with the daring, capture of, Nazis, notably Adolf Eichmann, around in the 1960s, early 1960s. Was it 1960? He was anyway executed, was tried, convicted, and executed in 1962. So Adolf Eichmann was an architect of the transportation of European Jews to the death camps, including, Auschwitz, and so again, I was a Holocaust study fellow at the Institute of Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University. So I was fortunate that I studied these things, and but however, nothing can be more baseless. You have to remember that the Mossad and Israel, the state of Israel, was not even 20 years old. They were not even 2 decades when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and of course, the United States intelligence, the CIA, the U.S. military apparatus, was a colossus in the world at that time, and it still is, right? And it obviously, they gave aid. The U.S. gave aid uh, to uh, to the Israeli government, to Israel, the state of Israel, and was protecting Israel. So you don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? So uh, far from it, the Israeli government or the Mossad would not, attempt to, bite the hand that fed it, in the early 1960s. And in fact, the Mossad worked with the CIA. I don't want to make it seem like they're rivals or anything. The Mossad actually worked with the CIA. The benefit of the CIA, we see from their actions, in 1956, when they're very effective, burgeoning intelligence, agents, the outfit at the time, when they acquired the secret speech of the Soviet leader at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, in which he denounced um, uh, Joseph Stalin's, crimes. And so when they acquired it, they actually shared that information. They provided that information to the CIA. So you can see that there was cooperation between the Mossad and the CIA, the U.S. government, and the U.S. government supported the state of Israel. Uh, yes, the JFK had resisted and had opposed the nuclear development of the Israelis in their Dimona complex. Uh, but did the Israelis need to have the JFK assassinated in order to accomplish, to acquire nuclear arms? Certainly not. I mean, look at other nations that were able to develop their own nuclear arms, like India or Pakistan in the 70s. Did they need to assassinate a U.S. president, or did a U.S. president need to be assassinated before they acquired nuclear arms? No, not India, not Pakistan. And besides, how could the Israelis or Mossad guarantee that with the assassination of JFK, they would not be unleashing some kind of Pandora's box? How do they know that Lyndon B. Johnson would certainly support the development of their nuclear program? By the way, Lyndon Johnson continued to resist and oppose. He never gave official sanction to the development of Israel's nuclear program. He continued to oppose it, and at best, Israel surreptitiously developed their nuclear capacity through LBJ's nod and a wink, right? So, but not with his support. The same thing as other nations. So, the U.S. government, U.S. presidents have resisted, Israel's development of a nuclear program, just as they have with other nations, including Pakistan and India. But Pakistan and India did not need the assassination of a U.S. president in order to accomplish their development of their nuclear programs, right? The acquisition of their nuclear arms. Why is it that anybody thinks that Israel needed the assassination of a U.S. president, in this case John F. Kennedy, before they could actually acquire nuclear arms? Well, that's because that's an anti-Semitic thought, because they might be anti-Semites, I don't know, but there's a and that's the one has to be cautious. Like when one says that the Soviets were possibly behind the assassination of JFK, one has to be cautious because we know that anti-Semites are normally, propagating the notion that socialism or communism is a creation of Jews. It's a conspiracy of Jewish people. So that is not the case, right? There are many different forms of socialism. There have been Jews who've been socialists, and remember where there was a first communist revolution, successful communist revolution in the world, in Russia. That was where, in the Russian Empire, that was where you had the most Jewish people, residing. But one has to make these distinctions, especially with I suppose those who know that the first prime minister of Israel, who was the prime minister during the time of, he was actually not the prime minister when JFK was assassinated. That's David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion had been prime minister and he resigned in June 1963. In fact, in one of these conspiracy theorists have made allusion to that the fact that Ben Gurion and JFK were opposed regarding the development of the nuclear arms, and Ben Gurion resigned in June 1963, and in fact the head of the Israeli the head of the Mossad, Isser Harel, also resigned in March 1963. Therefore, and JFK died in November 1963. There's some kind of conspiracy going on. Well, there are many things that happened in 1963, right, that did not have any effect or association with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. For instance, Kim Philby, the mole, the Soviet mole, the British intelligence guy, the MI6 senior British intelligence officer who turned out to be a Soviet mole, a KGB agent. He defected fully, escaped from Beirut in January 1963, right, when he was finally exposed the second time, right? Many events occurred in 1963. Hugh Gaitskell, who had been the head of the British Labour Party, died in 1963, and Harold Wilson succeeded him. By the way, there were these conspiracy theories that Harold Wilson was really a Manchurian candidate. He was actually a KGB agent. None of this was ever confirmed. In fact, it was always discredited. So there were all these conspiracy theories, and let me go back to the notion of the anti-Semitic trope of linking socialism and communism with Jewish people. So yes, David Ben-Gurion, right, the first prime minister of Israel, and he was prime minister in 1963. He resigned in June 1963. He was also the minister of defense, of Israel's minister of defense. He resigned in 1963. Indeed, he was a socialist, right? He was a known socialist, but he was a Zionist socialist, not a Marxist-Leninist socialist, right? He was not a Marxist-Leninist communist, right? So there's a difference. And in fact, he was born in Poland. He'd been born in Poland, and he eventually emigrated to Palestine, and he was a Zionist. So there were the Zionist socialists in Poland, and I'd mentioned that there was a socialist communist party made up of Jewish people in the Pale of Settlement, also called Cherta Osied Losti, right? Which was, in the Tsarist Russian Empire. However, Ben Gurion, when he was a kid in Poland, he joined a Polish Zionist socialist party, and they opposed the Bund. That's the general Jewish Labor Bond party, right? They were communists who eventually integrated with the Bolsheviks. The left wing eventually integrated with the Bolsheviks. David Ben Gurion he got into debates with the Bund. He fought with the Bund when he was a kid, and throughout his life, he was a socialist Zionist. And his philosophy, he wanted a Zionist state. That's a Jewish state of Israel, and which the Bund opposed. The Bund in Eastern Europe, what they wanted was an Jewish autonomy within Jewish cultural autonomy within Eastern Europe, and this was not what the socialist Zionists, which David Ben Gurion joined. This is not what they wanted. The Zionists, of course, wanted a Jewish state an independent Jewish state of Israel in Palestine. Wanted Jewish people to return to Palestine, right? So I think I've mentioned before. Well, if I've never mentioned, so how did the Jewish people end up in Europe? During the Roman Empire in AD 70, there's a famous dispersion, right? When the Romans, conquered, Israel's kingdom in Palestine at the end, and then they caused the dispersion of Jewish people all over Europe. So that was a very long time ago, and so the Zionist movement wanted Jewish people to return back to Israel, right? So David Ben Gurion, although they say he admired, he verbally actually he admired Vladimir Lenin, right? He admired him as a decisive leader, but not as a strategic, decisive leader, but not as he did not support his Marxist-Leninist views, right? So we have to remember, Marxist-Leninism, right, is against nationalism. It's against nation states. They want an international brotherhood of the proletariat, and they believe the nation states, which the Zionists wanted, and the Zionists wanted a state of Israel, right? The Marxist-Leninists, they believe that the nation state is a detriment to the solidarity of the proletariat, right? And that the nation state nationality is also, is a superstructure. So it's a tool used by the ruling class, in this case, the capitalist, the bourgeois, to continue to dominate and manipulate and, exploit the proletariat. And so what the Marxist-Leninists, right, a form of socialism or communism, what they want is an internationalization of the working class, for them to have to be united as to be united as one, a global Soviet government. That's what the Marxist-Leninists advocate, right? So they don't want distinct nation states. So it's counter to their hypothesis, right? So again, there were many different strands of socialism, and yes, David Ben Gurion wanted a worker-controlled state of Israel, and where focused on on agriculture, right? It was focused on agriculture, and but but in the state of Israel, so that he was Zionist in the state. He wanted the state of Israel. He wanted that Jewish identity. So, which is opposed to what Marxist Leninists, want. So, many people think that because Karl Marx's form of socialism is the most influential in the world, that it sort of was the beginning of socialism. No, there were already various strands of views, forms of socialism that existed prior to him. Like there's Henry, the French guy, a French philosopher, Henry de Saint-Simon. There's Robert Owen. He was a Welsh guy. There are many different people. In fact, Plato and had elements of socialism in his philosophies. There was Thomas More, and so there was a guy called Mikhail Bakunin. He was a Russian nobleman, and he was a philosopher, and he propounded what was called the anarchist collectivism, right? So they are a more radical form of socialism, where they advocate anarchy, a stateless society, no states, just the working class, the without any government. Now you have to remember that Karl Marx and Lenin, they advocated the dictatorship of the proletariat, that the proletariat overtake, that the proletariat should overthrow the bourgeois, like the bourgeois ruling class, and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat. But this dictatorship of the proletariat, led by an elite intelligentsia, or by the party, led by a party, is supposed to be temporary. And remember that Karl Marx's form of socialism is supposed to be based on scientific, materialism, historical dialectics of historical materialism, saying that okay, over time it would just naturally come about through, in a communist state, and that this dictatorship of the proletariat is temporary, right? So this is different from what David Ben-Gurion, advocated, what he imbibed. He wanted a Jewish state, and he wanted some kind of cooperative cooperation amongst Jewish workers, in an agricultural society, which was sort of different from what Marxist Leninists, propose. So again, like I said, there's no credibility to the notion that the Mossad had John F. Kennedy assassinated, because again, you don't bite the hands that feed you. It's just an anti-Semitic trope that's constantly saying Jewish people behind every conspiracy. And as I was saying, that there were many different strands of socialism, and yes, there was the general Jewish labor bond, which was a socialist communist group that eventually integrated with the Bolsheviks after the Bolshevik Revolution. By the way, I had mentioned in an earlier video that Lenin, just because I just remembered that, yes, David Ben-Gurion was supposed to have admired Lenin. And it wasn't because Lenin had a Jewish grandfather. In fact, throughout his life, Lenin was never aware. Throughout his life, it wasn't known. He was never aware that that he had any Jewish ancestry. So his maternal grandfather was a guy who changed his name to Alexander Blank. He was a Jewish guy, but he hid it. He hid it because there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Tsarist Russia, and so he eventually became a nobleman, and he went to medical school. He wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be socially mobile, and there was a lot of discrimination, anti-Semitism against Jewish people in Tsarist Russia at the time. So Lenin was never aware that his maternal grandfather was who changed his name to Alexander Blank, and he became a lesser noble. He became a lower aristocrat, right? He was never aware that he was actually a Jewish guy. Again, his paternal side were of German origin, right? Of German origin, and he was Russian, so and he had Russian as well. So Lenin always viewed himself as a Russian. Of course, having become one of the most famous men in the world after his death, 8 years after his death was when his sister, Lenin's sister, discovered that their maternal grandfather, Alexander Blank, had actually changed his name. He had adopted the Russian Orthodox religion so he could get ahead, so he could become a medical doctor, and so he could become a Russian nobleman. He became a Russian noble, lesser noble, right? She found out this later on because, of course, Lenin was now famous. He was one of the most powerful, most recognized figures still today in the world. In fact, the former capital, St. Petersburg, was renamed after Lenin. It was renamed Leningrad. St. Petersburg had been the capital of Russia since 1712, up to 1918, right? And it was renamed after Lenin died in 1924 to Leningrad. They reverted to St. Petersburg in 1991 with the dissolution of the USSR. So he was a famous man. So everybody was digging up his history, digging up archives. So his sister didn't know until 8 years after his death. By this time, Lenin was embalmed in a sarcophagus in Russia, right? So that's a mausoleum, right? They're the same thing. That was when Lenin's sister got to know. And when Lenin's sister got to know and she told Stalin, Stalin hid it. And so the Soviets hid it. They let nobody knew. They never let anybody know. It was hidden in the archives. This wasn't disclosed. It wasn't revealed to the public until after 1991. So again, David Ben-Gurion only admired Lenin from the standpoint of being a strategic thinker, a strategic leader, because David Ben-Gurion was a leader. Something you'll find leaders do is they study other leaders as well, right? When I was a kid, I'm not a leader of anything, but when I was a kid, I loved to read. I read Napoleon. I read many books about biographies of Adolf Hitler. They were in my home, right? I think Hitler was a monster, but when I was a kid growing up in Nigeria, I'd read several biographies, huge ones. I remember one of them. I think one of them was written by. Let me not name any names. So I'd read several because they were in my home of Adolf Hitler. Many biographies of Adolf Hitler, many biographies of Napoleon, many biographies of. I'd read a biography of Lenin already. Biographies of Chairman Mao Zedong, all in my house, right? Of course, including the U.S. president. So does that make me? No, it doesn't mean that I embrace their ideology or their philosophy. No, and so although David Ben-Gurion he did admire Lenin, he did say he admired Lenin, as a leader, right? But he, however, did not embrace Marxist-Leninist thought because again, he was a Zionist. He believed in a nation state, in a Jewish nation state, which contradicts what Marxist-Leninism proposed. The Marxist-Leninism, they propose that the nation state is a tool of the capitalist ruling class, and that must be done away with, and that it sort of prevents, it causes divisions, amongst the working class. It makes them think in terms of national identity instead of creates the necessary class consciousness that they want for the solidarity of the proletariat and to be able to advance, revolution or whatever, So that's the other thing. The Marxist-Leninist form of socialism, they advocate the use of violence to overthrow the capitalist ruling class. There are other socialist strands who do not advocate violence, right? They seek reforms. They think that, that the ruling class can be reformed through the party system over time. So there are different strands of socialism. Again, even Plato had forms of socialism in his philosophy. There was Thomas More. There was Robert Owen. There was, as I said, Henry Saint Simon. Saint Simon. There are many different forms of socialism that predated Karl Marx's scientific socialism. So, I've tried to just point out that no, there was no credibility. It's baseless to suggest that the Mossad or the Israelis had anything to do with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, just because people think that their nuclear program benefited with his assassination. Again, as I said, the fact that the seed in the ground, in the soil, benefits from rainfall, uh, it does. We don't think that the seed in the soil is the one that created the rainfall. No, absolutely not. Um, and just because serendipity occurs, serendipity is a lucky chance find. So because one serendipitously found something, it doesn't mean they created that lucky chance find. There was nothing lucky or serendipitous about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so uh, you know I hope I've been able to just debunk that myth, that reckless conspiracy theory that the Mossad or the Israelis had anything to do with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Again, you don't bite the hands that feed you. That's just like a kid who's been bullied in school, and he's got this powerful protector. Why would he sell out this powerful protector and get the powerful protector to be on the side of his enemies, right? You keep your enemies at bay, and you keep your friends your friends. You don't betray them, right? And that's what that would amount to. So again, uh, I I will continue my videos just discussing U.S. presidents, and of course, I also draw attention to color of law violations that I've been suffering in Montgomery County, Maryland, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts. Um, I was swatted on May 16, 2023 in my home without probable cause. It was an illegal, unlawful action. A fabricated and perjured emergency evaluation petition was used by a Howard University professor, Jide Iwarere, in which he lied, committed perjury. He did it surreptitiously. My family was unaware, and he lied absolutely, and I was not given a chance. My Sixth Amendment rights have been violated. It's been almost 3 years. If somebody makes an accusation, a defamatory accusation against me, our laws, our rule of law, we have the rule of law in the U.S., and I'm entitled to be able to to defend myself in a court of law and question my accuser, right? To cross-examine them and defend myself in a court of law. I've been denied this, right? I'm supposed to know my charges. I'm supposed to be given notice. I was not given any notice that the police ostensibly were coming to deliver an emergency, a fraudulent emergency evaluation petition by a fabulous Jide Iwarere, a Howard University professor who acted with malicious intent, and he fabricated an emergency evaluation petition. Montgomery County Police suborned perjury, and they assaulted me. They attacked me in my home, falsely imprisoned me, blocked my people, locked me in my home, tasered me, almost killed me, released tear gas in my apartment, lied to my neighbors, spread disinformation. The way they acted was barbaric in the way third world banana republics are said to operate. This happened in Maryland, in Montgomery County, in my home where I lived alone. I was living lawfully there. And all of this happened in order to obstruct justice, to impede a an EEOC complaint I'd filed, Office of Special Counsel complaint I'd filed regarding fraud, waste, and mismanagement. So I was doing my job. That's a lawful thing to do. And that's a right. We have a right to petition the government, right? That's our First Amendment rights. I've been defamed. Defamation is actually a violation of our First Amendment rights, right? So people are not supposed to. You have a freedom, right of, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but you should not tell lies, and your speech should not be malicious, and it should not be full of lies, and it should not be intended to damage the reputation of someone, right? That was the intention of the emergency evaluation petition, to damage my reputation, to discredit me, and I've not had my day in court. I'm a law-abiding American citizen. I pride myself on being law-abiding, right? I was doing the right thing in the U.S. government, in the Department of Defense, the Department of Navy when I was sorted, and I've not had my day in court. My rights have been violated. I've been prevented from working because I've been defamed. Judge James Bonifant and the Montgomery County State Attorney's Office, they've damaged my reputation, prevented me from working. The judge took my job from me, prevented me from going to work when he placed me under house arrest from 2023 to 2024. He locked me up in jail for months, for about 9 months, an aggregate of 15 months, right? And he's denied me my rights, my due process. And it's astonishing that these illegal actions are occurring in America. We have judges who are gaslighting, violating the rule of law, violating the rights of citizens. In any event, I'll keep you posted. I'm seeking justice. Thank you for listening.